Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, look, can I thank you for that really kind introduction? I feel slightly embarrassed, but you're really, really kind. And I feel really honoured to be here at NCS today. I've been hearing from your principal about the incredible work that the school does. I think you're in a fantastic building, and obviously there's huge ambition and enthusiasm here. I gather you've had some very illustrious people in the past, Mervyn King, Vince Cable and others. I haven't come with a half an hour prepared speech, maybe like others have. I thought I'd just talk for about 15 minutes about some of my experiences, and then really the best way these things work is to have comments, questions. I'm sure you've got lots of questions, which I'll try and answer. Let's then see how it goes if there is time for selfies at the end. I thought I'd say something about why am I in politics? So how did I get into politics in the first place? Because I think that's important and sort of relevant to my story. Secondly, something about why I think politics matters to your generation, and I may not need to convince you of that. Thirdly, something about how political change happens, because I've got a particular view about the way change happens, which is maybe not the view that most politicians will come along and tell you. Then something about what matters to me about the country and the world at the moment, and then something about what I'm doing at the moment in my newly relaxed life. How did I get into politics? Maybe like many people here, my parents weren't born in this country. My parents were born in Belgium and Poland. They were Jews who essentially fled. My dad in 1940 and my mum after the Second World War. Both of them lost relatives in the Second World War. My mum lost her father. My dad lost lots of members of his family. The reason that is relevant, and I feel very much a part of a refugee family, and the reason I think that's relevant to my experience is not that my parents talked to me a lot about their experiences, because they were very traumatic experiences, and anyone here who's had similar or hard experiences with their families will recognize it's not something that they necessarily wanted to talk about. But I think it very much sort of informed them with a certain ethic, a certain idea that, not religious, because although we're Jewish, they didn't have a particularly religious background, but a sort of sense that you had a responsibility to leave the world a better place. And for them, who had lost so many of their relatives at an incredibly young age, they felt you weren't just put on this earth to kind of have a nice time. I mean, you could have a nice time, but you were put on this earth for a kind of to do something responsible, to see injustice and try and do something about it. And they very much instilled that message in me and my brother, not by like lecturing us at, breakfast, lunch and tea time saying, you've got to do good in the world, but just a sense that it was an unfair, unjust world, and we needed to do something about it. And that was what they chose to do in different ways. My dad as an academic, my mum as a campaigner. So I went to my local comprehensive, Haverstock Comprehensive, and state primary school before that. And I kind of didn't, as you'll have heard from the introduction, I didn't think to myself, I definitely want to go into politics at the age of like 13 or anything like that. I was quite interested in journalism. I spent a bit of time in journalism. I got to Oxford for my comprehensive, and that was an eye-opening experience. I was my college president there. I came out of university not quite sure what I wanted to do, so if you're one of the people at the moment who thinks, well, I don't quite know what I want to do, I wouldn't worry about that, because in a way you might learn what you want to do by doing your degree if you go on to university, and I know most people are going on to university and then finding out. So I went into journalism, and I ended up thinking, well, journalism isn't really my thing. I kind of care about journalism. I think it's important, but I feel too partisan. I like, I care a lot about what happens, and I don't feel I can be objective, which I think is kind of important in journalism, although it's not true of many journalists in our country, indeed in many. But and I found my way into politics. How did I find my way into politics? Actually, it's a sort of funny story. We did an interview with Harriet Harman, and as she would probably say, who was later my deputy, and as she would probably say, the interview didn't go very well. For her, I was doing not exactly the interviewing, but I was helping the person doing the interviewing. And I met her afterwards when she was not feeling very good about the interview, and I kind of got to know her and ended up going to work for her. And then one thing led to another. And if you want to ask me more about how did I become an MP and so on, do ask me about that, because that may be relevant to your future thinking. So that's something about me and what my family background was, and maybe why my parents motivated me to get involved. Secondly, why does politics matter? And as I say, I may not need to be telling you this. I just think there's no issue that affects you that isn't relevant to politics. Almost no issue. We're debating the European referendum at the moment. Obviously, that's a big decision for the country. But climate change, student fees, housing, wages, all of these issues. And so one of the most depressing things on the doorstep when you knock on doors is when people say to you, I don't care, you're all the same. I mean, I'd almost rather somebody said I'm voting Conservative, because at least then they're engaged in politics. It's when people say to you, you're all the same. And let's be honest, probably 1 out of every 2 doors, people say that I'm just not interested. I don't care. And there's deep reasons, I think, for that, which we can talk about. But I think politics matters. Thirdly, let me say something about how political change happens. And I think this is really, really important. In a way, the most important thing I want to say to you today. Because some people will say, look, change happens because great leaders make change happen. Now, of course, great leaders are important and have an important impact. But really, I have a different view about change. I think it's movements that change things, people. In a way, great leaders only do the things that they're pushed into doing in one way or another. So think about the great advances that we've seen in Britain, or what I consider to be the great advances: the National Health Service, rights for workers, lesbian and gay rights in the last 20, 30 years, the minimum wage. These things didn't happen because leaders came along and said, I've got this really great idea, let's do this thing. They happened because people said, we demand this change. So if you think about the National Health Service, it came because people weren't willing to put up with what they saw in the 1930s, which was a patchwork health service. You had to pay if you got sick. People couldn't afford medical treatment. It was them that pushed before and after and during the Second World War to say never again must we go back to the 1930s and what we saw, and indeed before, and what we saw then. If you think about the lesbian and gay rights movement, which is one of the biggest changes I've seen in my lifetime, it happened because they demanded change. It's because people in that movement said, we want to see change happen. We're fed up with being treated as second-class citizens. Now, that all sounds rather big, but I suppose one of the things I want to convince you of is that whether it's in your college, and I know I mustn't get into trouble here by encouraging insurrection in the college, but whether it's changes you want to see in your college, or whether you want to see changes in your community or as you go about your life, you actually have a lot more power than you think. In the end, people can make absolutely huge change happen if they get together. And I really believe that. It's not to say leaders don't make a difference, they do, but you may feel powerless, but actually you've got a lot more power than you think. Because in a way, in a democracy, in the end, if people get together and demand change, even not in a democracy, change can happen. And there are big historical changes which show that, and there are immediate things that happen in local communities that show that as well. The local library being kept open, a children's centre being built, all kinds of a zebra crossing being put on a road. Big changes, small changes happen because people come along and say, we want to see the change happen, and maybe we can talk about some of the changes that you're interested in. What do I care about then in our world? So I'm obviously no longer leader of the Labour Party, but I said when I stepped down that my view wasn't, that's it for me, I can now sort of go and tend my garden or whatever else, take up some hobbies. I still care about changing the country, but not as the leader of the Labour Party, but doing my bit as a member of Parliament in my local constituency. I care, as the introduction very well said, I care a lot about inequality. What am I campaigning on at the moment? In my constituency, we've got an interesting issue, which may be an issue here, which is about the way in which the poorest people in our society tend to pay the most for the most basic goods. It's true of gas and electricity supplies, it's true of credit. It's also true, big issue in my constituency, about the provision of some pretty basic goods, washing machines, cookers, sofas. There's an organisation called Bright House, some of you may have heard of it, and basically I would say they're the payday lenders of the white goods sector. So they make people pay enormous amounts of money for some pretty basic things. I've got a local campaign going on at the moment about showing there's an alternative to that with the credit union. So I'm kind of thinking about the big issue of inequality, but how do I actually translate that into helping people locally in my constituency? Another big issue I care a lot about is climate change, because I think that if I think about your generation, I think my generation will end up having been seen as a pretty selfish, and previous generations be pretty selfish on a number of issues, and one of them is climate change. The sense that what kind of custody, what kind of stewardship are we showing to the planet? So one of the big issues I'm campaigning in Parliament and elsewhere, is the need to properly make the transition to a low-carbon economy, because I think extreme weather events here and around the world, climate refugees, all of the issues associated with climate change, which you will know about, are kind of big and important, and if we don't tackle them, then I think our generation will be held in very, very low esteem, and I think there's a really small window of opportunity when we've got to tackle it. There's progress has been made on it, but there's a lot further that we've got to go. So there are a couple of things that I am working on. The last thing I'll say to you is really to return to where I started, which is some of you are doing politics in this college, some of you are not studying politics, that's fine. Some of you will be Labour, some of you will not be Labour, that's fine as well. I think the most important thing I'd say to you is don't give up on politics and the ability to change things. Because there's lots to put you off about politics. You know, politicians who break their promises, the argy-bargy in the Prime Minister's questions, which I didn't like much. I'm sure you don't, maybe it's entertaining occasionally, but, you know, I don't think it tells you very much about the country or your life experience or your family's life experience. So there's lots that puts people off about politics. Sometimes the sense that politics is too the same, is there enough of a difference? But in the end, as I said earlier, the big causes that have been changed by people not giving up on politics, but by actually keeping faith with politics and the ability to change things. And part of politics also is not just done by politicians, it's done by people. And that's why I'm really delighted to be here and have a genuine conversation about the future of this community and the future of the country. Thank you very much. You're Mark with the YouTube channel, is that right? You see, I did my homework, you see. I think he's got a perfect right to engage. And look, in a way, it's a sure sign that someone's losing the argument when they want to play the man, not the ball. So they kind of want to say, oh, you know, it's really unfair, President Obama shouldn't be intervening, when actually they don't want to take on President Obama's argument. And as he said in his comments, look, lots of people are saying this is what America would do in the case of Britain leaving the European Union. So lots of the people on the side for leaving are saying, well, America would be like really early in the queue, they'd want to have a free trade agreement with us, we wouldn't lose out and so on. And he's saying, well, I'm the president of America, so I kind of have a view on this, and you'd be at the back of the queue. So I just think, you know, as I say, it's a sure sign somebody's losing the argument. I think he's got a perfect right to intervene. But in the end, I think actually, look, it's the British people who obviously make the choice, but you've got to take all the arguments into account, and I think his perspective is definitely relevant.
As you said, you care about getting people involved in politics.
Yeah.
So especially because young people are the age bracket least likely to vote. So how do you think we can engage people, young people especially, in politics more?
Well, I'm honestly not doing a politician's cop-out here, but tell me what you think. Because look, one of the big frustrations of the last election was that you know, Labour won by, I think, my expert is going to correct me here, like 15, 20 points among young people? Under 25s, we won by like a long distance, but like 45% of something like 45% of young people.
We've got more votes among everyone under 55.
Yeah, but basically, if you look at the turnout, like older people, I think voted like in the 70, almost over 70% of older people voted, and about under 50% of young people voted. And by the way, that is a potential problem in this referendum, which is that young people are pro staying in but don't bother to turn out, and older people are more likely, so it looks, to be for leaving and do turn out. Anyway, but sorry, I mean, I've got some thoughts, but tell me what you think.
I think votes at 16 should be implemented.
Okay, good. I agree with that. How you engage young people in politics. Look, I think votes at 16 is right, and I'm in favour of it. I would say that the biggest thing is persuading young people it can make a difference. Because this making a difference problem that I talked about earlier, I think particularly afflicts young people who think, is it all the same? I think one of the things that Jeremy Corbyn has managed to do is actually galvanise young people. Bernie Sanders has been beating Hillary Clinton by large majorities in the Democratic primaries, again engaging young people in these big answers to questions. So I think it's, yes, votes at 16, citizenship in schools. I think explaining, sometimes young people who are of voting age will say to me, I don't really understand it. No one's ever talked to me about what politics is about. So I think that's important, but I think big answers, showing there's a difference, is in the end the most important most important thing.
What was the main reason why you decided to advocate for the UK remaining within the EU?
Look, on the EU, how many people, by the way, can vote in this referendum? And how many people are voting for Remain, or plan to vote for Remain? And how many people are voting for Out? Okay, so you're going to agree with me then. So look, here's my reasons for being for In. I think it's economic, but I think it's also, the big thing I would say is that it's sort of strategic. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you think about the world's problems, the Leave people have this illusion, and I think David Cameron was right, he called it the illusion of sovereignty. This idea that, well, we've got problems of our own. If we isolate ourselves, we can solve those problems on our own. But think about all of the problems that the country faces: climate change, tax evasion and avoidance, terrorism, crime. All of these problems cross borders. And so the notion that you can do it on your own is just not true anymore. And sometimes it's about people thinking that it's still a British Empire, you know, like 150 years ago. And sometimes it's just people misunderstanding the nature of the modern world, I think. So I think we're much stronger and we've got much more power over our own affairs if we're in and not out. And also, by the way, I think there's another thing, and I think this is why young people are for in, by and large, which is the world's kind of coming closer together, not getting further apart. And so the idea that you can sort of cut yourself off just doesn't, and then the Leave people say, well, we're not for cutting ourselves off, but if you're not for cutting yourselves off, it's a very odd way of behaving to say we're going to get out of this union of 28 countries. So that's why I'm for in.
It might be slightly early to ask this, but what do you think the outcome of the next election will be in the UK?
On terms of the next election, I think Labour can absolutely win the next election. And I'm certainly not one of these people who wants to write off our chances or believes we should write off our chances. It's to be determined. It depends on what Jeremy Corbyn does. It depends on what the government does. You know, it's absolutely to be determined. And it goes back to what I said earlier, which is ideas, I think, are what will win us or not win us at the next election. What ideas have we got for changing the country?
How would you support educating people and young people about mental health and basically just other stuff and life skills like taxes and financing? I think this is really, I think it's a really important question. It strikes me, and I'm clearly not a young person, so I'm only sort of talking from what I see, that in a way there's never been a better time to be a young person. The world feels more open, there seems to be more opportunity in a way, but there's never been more pressure as a young person. And I think that part of the challenge about the curriculum, and I was talking to, where I'm an MP in Doncaster, we've been talking about an education commission which is looking at these issues. I think part of it is to
to teach kind of resilience to young people and to like take account of these mental health issues and citizenship as well. But I think the notion that, and I think Michael Gove has a lot to answer for, the notion that actually education is just a narrow thing, which is just about the exams, ignores the fact that in order to pass the exams, other things have got to be kind of right. And it's also about preparing people for life. So I would prefer a broader or more narrow curriculum, certainly up to the age of 16. And then after, you know, at 16, it's kind of, I would also have proper citizenship education as well. So I think, I mean, I personally think you're onto something very important.
If you could give like all the students in this room right now, like regardless of what career they want to go into, one piece of advice,
right?
What would it be?
My one piece of advice would be follow your dreams. Follow your ambitions, follow your dreams, and don't let people say, because you didn't go to a private school, because of the background you come from, you can't achieve them. Yes, are there advantages for some people compared to others? Absolutely. But don't let people put you off. And I think one of the great things about this school, from my experience of it, is that actually it's encouraging high ambition and nobody should stand in your way, and I think that's really important.
I just wanted to know what your thought on the minimum wage was and what your thoughts are on having different minimum wages for under 25s and over 25s.
What do you think about that?
Personally, I think it's rather stupid to have different wages for under 25s and over 25s, because just because you've touched that threshold of 25 years of age doesn't necessarily mean you have different living standards or different needs as a person, because just because you're 25 doesn't necessarily mean you're providing for a family.
Look, the minimum wage is a really important institution, and innovation. And I understand the real sort of unhappiness there is among young people in the fact that they get paid a much lower minimum wage than, I mean, both apprentices and then 16 to 18 and 18 to 21. You know, it's just a much significantly lower. And now with the living wage, you know, another rung down. The reason has always been that it's easier for that if you give the same minimum wage, employers will inevitably not employ young people, but because they'll say, well, they don't have the experience, so we'll employ the older person instead. So it's a kind of young people's employment issue. I personally think that's always got to be looked at afresh, because I think it's quite possible that the young people's minimum wage is too low and needs to be higher and could be done without having adverse effects on employment among people.
What are your views on the junior doctor contract? Is it correct to extend working hours knowing that it would compromise quality of life?
Just as a matter of interest, are you just interested in the junior doctor's contract? Are you interested in doing medicine? Do you know people in the health service?
I am interested in doing medicine.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I meet now lots of junior doctors as I go around the country. I mean, you know, junior doctors that I meet, and I think it's true of the vast, vast majority, go into the health service because they love the NHS and they want to make a difference. I think, I mean, you know, I used to say Michael Gove was the most hated Secretary of State I'd ever come across. I now think Jeremy Hunt has sort of trumped him in the kind of hatred stakes, because, you know, he's after all supposed to be the guy who's the sort of custodian of the health service, of the NHS. And I thought it was a very good proposal from our shadow spokesperson, Heidi Alexander, at the weekend, which was to say, with the BMA, say, look, we're willing to let you pilot a new contract and have an independent assessment of what the impact of it is, but don't impose it on everybody. And, you know, it was a very, very reasonable proposal, and Jeremy Hunt just rejected it outright. And I think the unreasonableness is on the part of the government. And look, there are lots of junior doctors who I meet who are just very worried about the future of the health service. And I think, you know, they're right to be under this government. But by the way, I think there is a big issue for the country about how much we spend on the NHS. Because, you know, there's normal inflation and there's NHS inflation. And as people get older, as medical technology advances, NHS inflation is just, in other words, to keep up, is just more than normal inflation. Normal inflation is like 0 or 1% at the moment, but NHS inflation is just more than that. And as we don't spend more on the NHS, it's going to go backwards, and you already see it going backwards. And so that's the debate we're going to have as a country. So look, I'm not on Jeremy Hunt's side, I'm on the junior doctor's side, and I think there should be a resolution to this, and I think the government should see reason.
In, I think, 2012, I found out about this thing about TTIP. And now TTIP is this really dangerous thing, yet it seems to come into the media and outside the media, into the news in waves every now and then. I don't think people understand the severity and the seriousness of TTIP. Yet if we stay in the EU, it's going to impact us loads. What do you think about TTIP?
Okay, TTIP. So TTIP is this thing called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is this attempt to have free trade between the EU and the US, the European Union and the United States. And I think you're right to be concerned about it, because the problem is that it looks quite undemocratic in the way it's being proposed, which is that somehow corporations can override governments. And I'm for staying in the EU, but I'm for doing trade in a way that actually protects democracy. Look, I just want to end by saying thank you for all of your questions and the range. We got through a big range of issues. And the last thing I'll say is really to return to my theme, which is stay engaged in politics. Politics is frustrating, it is difficult, change is hard. I know from having lost the general election that there are big setbacks along the way, but I would really say don't let that put you off. And if you care about your community, your country, and your world, then I think in the end there's all kinds of ways you can go about changing things, but politics is incredibly important to that, and politics is also about these kind of conversations. So thanks very much.